Hello everyone, welcome to Unit 18. This is the CHC DIS 002 Person-Centred Behaviour Support Plans that I'm going to go through with you just now. So I'm just going to screen share this here for you. So as I said, follow established person-centred behaviour support plans. So we're going to start with the legislation on an international, federal and a state level. So the rights of people with a disability to have access to and equal participation in society as those without a disability has been embedded into legislation on an international, national and a state level through Disability Discrimination Act, the Australian Human Rights Commission, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the National Standards for Disabilities, Disability Service Plans, Queensland Disability Services and Anti-Discrimination Act for Queensland. So the UNCRPD stands for the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The purpose of the convention is to promote, defend and reinforce the human rights of all persons with disabilities. It acknowledges that social barriers and prejudices are themselves disabling. The Disability Services Act from 2006, this act aims to strengthen and enhance the infrastructure of the Queensland disability sector and wider community through the establishment of new processes. So these processes help to ensure better quality services, increased accountability and risk management, greater response to concerns, streamlined funding and approval processes, safeguards for people with a disability, such as the criminal history screening or police checks, as we commonly call them. The legislation also encourages all Queenslanders to promote inclusiveness within their own communities, and it further serves to strengthen the rights of the people with the disability. The key impacts of the legislation: people with a disability have the right to equal access to services available to all other members of their community. The Act shows specifically, the Act now specifically recognises the right to live a life free from abuse, neglect or exploitation, and the right to receive services in a way that respects the confidentiality of the personal information and in a safe, accessible, built environment appropriate for the person's needs. And they're doing some amazing work with accessible built housing these days, with raised and lowered bench tops and automatic doors and things like that. They're very good. The National Standards for Disabilities. So we have 6 standards: the rights, participation, inclusion, individual outcomes, feedback and complaints, service access and service management. So let's have a look at them now. Rights means that the service promotes the individual rights from freedom of expression, self-determination and decision-making, and actively prevents abuse, harm, neglect or violence. Participation and inclusion means the service works with the individual, so with the person and their families or friends and carers, to promote opportunities to them for meaningful participation and active inclusion in their society or their environment. Individual outcomes is the service and the supports are assessed, planned, delivered and reviewed to build on individual strengths and enable individuals to reach their goals. The feedback and complaints area means, or standard, means that regular feedback is sought and used to inform individual and organisation-wide service reviews for improvement. Service access means that the service manages the access, the commencement and the leaving of a service in a transparent, equal, and responsive way. And service management is the last standard. The service has effective and accountable service management and leadership to maximise outcomes for each person. So your duty of care, I know this comes up in most of the units. Everyone, regardless of role, has a duty of care towards every other person in their environment and to themselves, so not just yourselves or your clients. So your duty of care is taking responsibility for yourself and others where they're relying on you. Duty of care then simply means being in a position where someone else is likely to be affected by what you do or do not do. If you're not careful, it can reasonably be predicted that the other person might suffer some harm. So your duty of care is your legal obligation to keep yourself and others in your environment and your clients safe from any foreseeable harm. Duty of care includes an understanding of the role of the volunteer or the worker and working within the parameters of that role, being aware of possible risks to yourself and your clients, understanding and being able to implement appropriate emergency procedures, report all matters of concern, no matter how small, to your supervisor or to a relevant staff member, attend mandatory training sessions on an annual basis, and follow policies and procedures as set out by your organisation. So making sure you're always working within those. Recognising and reporting abuse. So abuse can take many forms. In your work in the community and disability service fields, you may come across abuse in the forms of child abuse, neglect, domestic violence, elder abuse, and abuse of someone with a disability. Abuse may become evident in the form of physical, financial, sexual, mental, and emotional indicators. And some of these indicators here now are some injuries, bruises or welts, burns, abrasions, cuts, lacerations, punctures, wounds, sprains, dislocations, fractures, broken bones, internal injuries. Those are all indicators of physical abuse. Neglectful conditions, victim conditions or the living environment. Neglectful actions, so actions failed to be taken or actions taken inappropriately or unlawfully. So when you're reporting abuse, so anyone who witnesses or is notified about an incident or an allegation of abuse, neglect or exploitation in relation to a person with a disability should take action. So people working in this industry, in the disability services sector, school or health services, should be familiar with the specific policies and procedures for responding to abuse, neglect and exploitation that apply within your own organisation. In all other instances, when responding to abuse, take these steps outlined. 1, always protect the person. So make sure the person who has experienced the abuse is safe and that they feel safe. Provide medical assistance as required. Remove the source of harm or the potential harm from the person. That might be other people or it could be harmful objects. And explain to the person what is happening and that it's not their fault. 2 is preserve and record the evidence. So where relevant, and especially for criminal acts, maintain the scene of the incident. So take photos and protect any personal articles involved. And step 3, report the incident immediately in line with your service policies, or as quickly as possible if it's outside normal business hours. So to your line manager or your supervisor or an appropriate person within your organisation. Just a little recap there on step 2, preserving and recording evidence. It says specifically in here to take photos. If you have an organisation phone that you can take those photos on, that's great. If you don't and you are using your personal phone, please make sure they are emailed directly to where they need to go, your supervisor or whoever is involved in this case, and then delete them from your camera roll. Reporting abuse still. So all criminal acts or deaths must be reported to Queensland Police. All information and reports must be kept confidential to protect people's rights and privacy. And record the complaint. Write the incident report and follow the processes dealing with that incident, complaints and allegations. Now we're going to have a little look here at leisure constraints. So leisure being activities of leisure. So people with a disability have a unique set of constraints to participation in leisure activities. So such people may have physical impairment, they may be emotionally challenged or developmentally disabled, they may have a cognitive impairment. So they might be living in a hospital, a prison, a group home. An individual with a disability may have anxiety, depression, or a lack of social skills. And changes in society's attitudes towards these individuals could help to minimise the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, and the structural constraints to participating in activities within the community. They are about to explain to us the difference between intrapersonal, interpersonal, and structural. So factors that prevent, reduce, or modify participation or may affect the quality or the enjoyment of the leisure activity for the person What impacts these? Your leisure preferences, your participation, and your enjoyment. The three types of constraints are the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, and the structural. The intrapersonal constraints. These are the individual values, the beliefs, and the attitudes that affect leisure. You may think something is morally wrong, or you were raised to have an opinion on something. So it's an internal. Interpersonal constraints arise out of social interactions with family and friends. They affect preference for the type of activities due to what others might like. And you may need a partner for an activity and you can't find one, for example. Okay, so they are external, they're social. Structural constraints, they're environmental. They might be a lack of finances, time or opportunity, transport, availability of the services. Those are structural. So here's an interesting slide, some characteristics of prisoners with intellectual disability. So the typical offender with an intellectual disability is disadvantaged by a wide range of psychological and social difficulties. So interestingly, they are nearly always young males. They're nearly always single. They belong to minority groups. They may have been imprisoned previously. They may have experienced institutionalization, so lived in some sort of institution. Been abused or neglected as a child, may have come from a disrupted family or have been segregated in a special school, probably because of their impairment. They may have a need for supported accommodation, group homes, etc. And generally, they lead somewhat a chaotic lifestyle. I find that a very interesting slide that those things have been able to be established. So the social model of disability. So we have talked about this in other units before. The social model of disability says that disability is caused by the way society is organised rather than by the actual impairment or difference. It looks at ways of removing barriers that restrict life choices for people, like stairs. So some barriers, factors in a person's environment that may, through their absence or presence, limit functioning and create a disability. These include aspects such as a physical environment that's not accessible. So like I was saying, with stairs and no ramps. A lack of relevant assistive technology, so assistive, adaptive or rehabilitative devices. Negative attitudes of people towards others with disabilities. And service systems and policies that are either non-existent or that hinder the involvement of all people with a health condition in all areas of their life. So we're going to look now at positive behaviour support plans. So the positive behaviour support plan is central to providing positive behaviour support to an individual adult by outlining. Now they say adult in here. We do have behaviour support plans for people under the age of 18 as well. So strategies that respond to, I'm going to say, the person's needs and the causes of the challenging behaviour, okay? How the use of restrictive practices may be reduced or eliminated, and how the adult's or the person's quality of life may be improved. So we have looked in other units at restrictive practices. They are a practice that inhibits the freedom or the choice of a person, either to move or to make decisions. The positive behaviour support plan is prepared by the disability service provider in consultation with that person, their support network, and their stakeholders. Positive behaviour support is about working with families and carers to develop a shared understanding about why the person has a need to engage in the challenging behaviour. So all behaviours have a message. So how does positive behaviour support do this? Some of the ways it can assist include helping the person to understand their daily life, using clearer ways of communicating with them, like introducing a picture schedule, changing the environment to make where they live and work better for them, such as reducing high noise levels. Improving the person's lifestyle so that they have more interesting and enjoyable activities to keep them involved and connected with their community. So these might be things like helping the person to gain employment and supporting recreation or activities of interest. Changing the environment so the person is involved in meaningful and positive relationships with others. A common principle in behaviour management is looking for the message an individual is communicating through their challenging behaviour. All behaviour has meaning or has a message. So managing some of these behaviours of concern, behaviour support plans often include the following areas of focus. Primary prevention, so putting in place support strategies to meet the person's unmet needs. This may involve making changes to the person's environment, improving communication, supporting positive relationships, and enhancing active engagement in meaningful activities. The idea is that making positive changes to the person's environment results in their needs being better addressed, leading to less of the need to engage in the challenging behaviour. Some examples of challenging behaviour or behaviour of concern. A behaviour of concern is when it threatens the quality of life or physical safety of an individual. So other people such as families or carers in the community. And this term's used to describe behaviour that interferes with an individual's support and daily life. So a behaviour of concern is a bigger behaviour. It does threaten quality of life. It might be damaging property, throwing items. It might be physical harm that you're inflicting on somebody else. That's a behaviour of concern rather than just a challenging behaviour. Some examples of behaviours of concern: verbal, physical aggression, self-harming, destruction of property, impulsive or dangerous behaviour, disinhibition, and hypersexuality. These are all behaviours of concern. So challenging behaviour and behaviours of concern may include some of these. The client hurting themselves. So they may hurt, hit, scratch themselves, hurting others. They may hit, pinch, or bite someone else, breaking things, breaking items, refusal, so refusing to do things. Person may not eat or take their medication. They may refuse to do activities that they used to enjoy. Doing the same thing over and over again, so repetitive behaviours. So a person may say something like the same word over and over again. It may not even be an irritating word, but by the time you've heard it a few times, it can become a bit irritating. So doing things that they know others don't like. For example, they may scream or swear or take their clothes off. Hiding away from other people, so not wanting to be with them and self-isolating. Responses to the behaviours of concern. So these might include how you respond to them. Don't take the behaviours personally. Remember, they're trying to communicate something. There's always a meaning or a message. Focus on responding positively to the behaviour rather than just reacting to it. Ensure that you are consistently using positive strategies. Provide structure and routine. Set clear limits and rules about what you expect and what is appropriate. Use clear, direct, and frequent communications. Give the person feedback about their behaviour and specifically what you like or you don't like. Use your I statements. I feel like this when you do that. It makes me feel. So be consistent with your responses to behaviours that you don't like. So always saying the same thing. It might be, please stop, I don't like it. Also be positive, notice and encourage appropriate behaviour. So high fives and good jobs go a long way. Try to defuse behaviour, perhaps with humour. Please make sure it's very appropriate humour and appropriately timed. Help the person to calm down by talking, changing the topic, or using distraction and diversion to shift the behaviour. Get support for yourself and the person exhibiting the behaviour of concern by discussing it with your supervisor or someone that you have to debrief with. So we're going to have a look here at some lifestyle enhancement strategies. Everyone needs to use specific skills to cope with difficulties they come up against on a day-by-day basis. Some clients often need to cope with situations they find unpleasant, like waiting in line for things, accepting unexpected changes in routine, and noisy environments. Keeping the client busy and engaged can help them to learn to cope. For example, A support worker could prompt the client to select a book or use their iPad in the doctor's surgery when they notice that they're looking bored or agitated. Support a client with how to relax by breathing slowly and then reminding them to use this skill in situations that they find distressing. Encourage clients to express how they feel. You can support a client to do this by initially labeling their basic feelings, such as happy, sad, angry, or scared, and gradually support them to independently do this by using speech or pictures if they're nonverbal. So we're going to look at supporting a person with a hearing impairment. So good communication strategies, and these include gaining the person's attention, making sure you are face to face with them, avoiding any background noise. Reduce the distance between you. So get closer if you need to. Optimize lighting so they can see you better for lip reading. Speak clearly, check for understanding, repeat, rephrase, or write it down, or paraphrase it in different words. Use facial and body expressions that go with the communication that you are giving. Make sure they are well matched. And check that hearing aids are working. I often giggle at that because I think that really should be the first thing that you would check. But it's at the end of the list, so that's okay. At least it's there. Supporting a person who is blind or has low vision. So always identify yourself. Remember that they might not be aware that you're there until you're quite close. So, hi Peter, it's Lynn, I'm here to support you with. Gather information about the person's safety skills and knowledge and review it regularly and know what they need. Make sure that written material that the person needs to have access to is appropriate format. It might need to be in Braille or perhaps a screen reader for a computer or an audio. Make sure anything that is typed up is in a clear font and at least a size 14. Go with what your client needs. If they need it bigger than that, make it bigger. Use simple and clear design with good contrast between text and background colours. People with low vision or vision impairment can find print on heavily coloured paper more difficult to read. So use photos in preference to cartoons where appropriate, because cartoons like this one become very black and white and lines tend to merge together. Consider using a poster rather than a text to convey the information. It might be bigger and clearer. Tips to look for with communication. Watch for non-verbal cues. Be attentive for signs of fear or anxiety or confusion in that person or misunderstanding. Give encouragement to those with weak language skills to give them confidence and to gain their trust. Check for understanding and correct any misunderstandings straight away. Reduce your background noise or go to a quieter space to communicate. Use a quiet, calm voice. So don't shout at somebody unless they're asking you to speak up. Shouting actually distorts the shape of your mouth when you're talking, and so it makes it very difficult for someone who is lip reading to understand what you're saying if you're shouting. Inform the person of what you are there to support them with, so make sure that they know there are no surprises and ask if they would like your support. Don't tell them. The CCC we're going to look at now. The CCC stands for a checklist of communication competencies. What is it? The CCC, checklist of communication competencies, is an assessment that's easy to learn, easy to use, and easy to interpret. That's why it's used. It is designed to use with teenagers or young adults with little or no speech. The CCC is a valid and reliable tool that makes it possible to assess skills that are observable, focus on functional skills, and assess early communication skills. So we're going to also jump back a little bit and look at the challenging behaviour, because the MAS, or the Motivational Assessment Scale, is very good for managing behaviour. It is a questionnaire designed to identify those situations in which the individual is likely to behave in certain ways. From this information, more informed decisions can be made concerning the selection of appropriate replacement behaviours. So an example item on the MAS, the Motivational Assessment Scale, might be, does this behaviour occur when you're talking to other people in the room? So managing the challenging behaviour still. So in the past, aversive, restrictive and intrusive practices have been used as methods of limiting or modifying the challenging behaviour of people with a disability, particularly where the behaviour posed a threat to the safety of the other person with a disability or others. So they've used the words aversive, restrictive and intrusive. Restrictive is the most common one here. A restrictive practice is what we talk about. So restrictive interventions are actions taken that restrict the rights or the freedom of movement of a person with a disability for the primary purpose of the behavioural control of that purpose. Aversive practices or restrictive practices are now prohibited within services managed or funded by Disability and Community Services, and restrictive interventions have been limited to be used only as a last resort, and then only if they are still the least restrictive method available under the circumstances. Restrictive interventions can sometimes be necessary in situations where a person is likely to harm themselves or others, in medical emergencies, or perhaps where they're required by law, and the example of that one is seatbelts in a moving vehicle. And that takes us to the end of the slides for person-centred behaviour supports. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again for the next unit.